We are membership based, and if you would like to be part of our Voice for Nature, do join us. Membership for family is only 70 or 80 ringgit per year. One of the thing about being part of MNS, we are actually a very strong family. We have 14 branches across Malaysia. All right, so to join, just go to mns.my/join-uf, join us. One of the things that we do, which is very little known, is that we are actually part of the EIA committee. EIA stands for Environmental Impact Assessment. So if there are major projects going on or about to start or wanted to be proposed, actually we are one of the trusted NGOs that are invited onto the committee, and we actually sit down and help to review and feedback on impacts to wildlife and also to the forest. And currently we are looking at, we just completed 2 EIAs in Seremban or in Negeri Malacca area. We have the incinerator in Sentayan in Seremban 2, and of course the Kuala Linggi International Port, which is at Sungai Linggi. I just want to share with you this. Okay, I'll key into when the speaker starts, so that if you could help to like the page, because we would like to launch a support to not develop the Sungai Linggi, because it is very, the biodiversity is very wide, and we would like to keep that for our next generations. When you join us through the app, actually, basically you have chances to do the quiz and also win prizes. So that's the reason why you should have the app registered with the app. Today, 3rd of April, we're talking about water birds, and next 2 weeks from now, we'll be going to Sabah and Sarawak. And if you haven't liked our page yet, please do so, our Facebook page and YouTube as well.
Today is water bird.
Yes, correct. Water bird. Okay, so for our speaker introduction, we'd like to invite Zoe to introduce Mr. Tou, please.
Okay, thank you, Vuti. So, Mr. Tou will be our speaker today, Mr. Tou Jing Yi. So he started birding since 1998.
Many years in birding. I'm also know him. Where you want to watch?
Okay, I mute him. Really.
Yeah. So, and he had been continuously doing for the last 23 years. And he has special interest in garden birds, raptor migration, and freshwater birds. And he's now serving in MNS Perak as EXO member since 2009. And on top of that, he has also been actively involved in Asian waterbird census since 2015. And he's now in charge of the annual count at Malim Nawar wetlands. Yeah, that's about it, I guess.
Okay, thank you,
I'll pass
Zoe.
it back to Vuti.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
So to our audience, please pay attention. We have 3 prizes today, and the quiz, it will be, actually it's already open, but you can't do yet because the presenter haven't presented yet. So when we have the Q&A session today, will be a bit longer than usual because we have a lot to cover, and we are very glad to have Tou with us. So Tou, over to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Vuti. All right, let me try to share the slides first. Okay. All right, can you see my slide? All right, so thank you, Vuti, for inviting me to give a talk over here. Of course, I'm not the most qualified person to give a talk about this, right? There are definitely people who know waterbirds better than I do, and especially Dave Bakewell. Seafood Dave Bakewell is one of the best waterbird expert in Malaysia, okay? All right, so I'll try my best to actually cover as much as possible because he really is wearing a very large shoe, so it's really hard to feel. First of all, I'd like to thank some of these people who have allowed me to use their resources, their knowledge for the presentation, especially a lot of images. So specifically to Dave Beckwil, Tou Jing Yi, Dr. Chan Kai Soon, Dr. Amma Singh, Michelle M.K., Chiu Sen Chung, and Francis Young, right? And I also seen quite a number of budding friends join us already in the FB Live as well as Zoom. So good afternoon to all of you. And hopefully I can give you guys an enjoyable experience today. This is a brief table of content on what we will cover today. So first of all, I'd like to set a scope of our talk. I will try to focus more on some water birds that we are likely going to encounter because from the description, you will see that we have quite a good number of water birds in Malaysia. We can't cover all of them, it's impossible. So I'll try my best to cover the more likely species to encounter, as well as some of the rarer confusion species that for them. Okay, so ended up I actually covered quite some species. Because most of us here in Malaysia are unlikely to have the opportunity to do pelagic birding. Okay, so pelagic birding are those that you have to take a boat and go far out of the sea when you can't see land anymore. You actually get quite a number of birds over that kind of situation. Okay, so I will exclude pelagic trips. So generally, we won't see too much of these kind of seabirds, right? We will put more focus on some more general and easier features that people can actually observe in the wild, rather than give you comprehensive and complete identification feature for all species, because some of them could be really challenging. We'll try our best to simplify it so that most people can digest. And I initially thought that perhaps we can actually cover about 50 species, but after adding a lot of the confusion species that looks like what we could be seeing, I finally got around about 90 species in the slides. So I hope I can actually get all of these covered rather well throughout this talk. Okay. All right, so first of all, let's have a look on the water birds in Malaysia. We have a good number of species from many families. So these are some of the lists. They will be in 3 pages. You will see I highlighted some in yellow. So all those highlighted in yellow are the more larger families with at least 10 members in Malaysia. So you can see you have ducks and rails. You have quite a number of families, quite a number of members in these families. While for the crane, it's a little bit sad. It's already extinct. And for the water birds of the larger group, as in an order with a lot of families, comes from these Charadriformes. Most of them are waders. And among the waders, you can see that the 2 largest family are plovers and sandpipers. Those sandpipers, Scolopacidae, is also the largest water bird family in Malaysia, has the most members, have up to 39 species. That's quite a lot. Well, the gulls and terns is also quite a large family. You have about 23 species, but a lot of them are pelagic, so we'll probably won't cover too much of them today. And finally, a few more families over here. One of the largest family among this group is the herons, up to 22 species. This is also one of the more likely family for you to encounter in a lot of urban areas. They are quite adapted to urban areas. So these are all the families of water birds that are known in Malaysia, and their species number over there. Adding up all of these, you get 9 orders of 28 families of water birds and a total of 175 species. We have about 800 plus. That means 175 species is quite a lot. That is close to, that's not close to, that's actually more than 20% of birds that we have. That means every 5 bird species in Malaysia, most likely one of them is a water bird. So that's actually quite a lot. Where can the water birds be found? They can be found in a wide range of habitats. Of course, in general, water birds, we call them water birds because they are found in habitats with water. So common water habitats inland includes some freshwater wetlands with ponds, rivers. Of course, a lot of ponds in Malaysia are artificially made. And we also cover open country. Open country are grassland. We don't have a lot of native grassland here, but we have a lot of areas that are now degraded to grassland. We also have paddy land and so on. And these places can actually get quite wet as well. We also have peat swamp forests in the inland areas. And this is one of the very specific type of wetland that is inside forests. And it do support some very specialized waterbird species such as storm's stock. Other than inland areas, of course, at the coast, we get even more water because you got all water at the sea. So at the coast, we get a lot of water as well. We have very well-grown areas like mangroves. We have coastal mudflats. We have sandy beaches, and we also have rocky shores. While going away from the coast, we can go into the sea, then we can actually get to the open seas. But the open seas is not something that we'll cover today because it's pretty much needing a boat and pelagic birding, right? Other than these habitats that are far away from people, actually a lot of them are formed within human habitats as well. So you can actually even find some waterbird habitats in urban areas. For example, there are some open air sewage ponds. Some of the inner water ponds are not totally closed up. Okay, I know a lot of those in Klang Valley are generally closed up, but a lot of those outside Klang Valley are still open air. And even in Klang Valley, you still can find open air one. I remember there's one large one in Cheras with egrets in it. And we have large storm drains as well, and other smaller drains that has water. You get to see some water birds there as well, like water hen, common sandpiper, and so on. And of course, we get a lot of small little pieces of grassland all over the place. And some of the neighborhoods will have a specific piece of grassland as well. And they can become flooded during the rain. They become flooded fields and will become like paddy land kind of habitat. These all attract waterbirds as well. So living in an urban area doesn't mean that you won't be able to see waterbirds. I live in a suburban area in Ipoh, and I've recorded 28 species in this area. And up to 12 of them, I can directly see or hear them without leaving my house. So actually, there is a great possibility that you just have to stay in your house and find a good number of waterbirds, maybe 10 or so, depending on where you live. Of course, if you can see a pond right outside of your house, your chances of seeing more waterbirds are higher than the rest. So you can see a photo over here of a lot of these egrets actually standing on the barring of the storm drains. This is some common sight that you possibly can see in some urban areas. In order to identify,
wait for
all right, sorry for the interruption. In order to identify waterbirds, it's pretty much the same as identifying birds. So we can use 4 of these criteria to help us identify waterbirds. Of course, the first one is the exterior features. This is very important because how it looks like, this is generally how most birders identify birds. Okay, but of course, other than that, we might also use other information to help us because a good number of waterbirds are migrants. Therefore, in certain time of the year, they are likely going to be found in Malaysia, and in certain times of the year, they are likely going to be found. So knowing when to find them is also quite helpful. Other than that, you need to know where you are at. So certain birds are only restricted in the coastal area, and some birds are restricted only in freshwater habitats. So knowing the location as well as habitat, for example, you're in Sabah, you're in Perak, you might be seeing different kind of waterbirds as well. So knowing the location helps a lot. Finally, the behavior is actually helpful as well. For example, how they feed, their calls, and so on can actually be a clue for you to pinpoint on certain identification for some very difficult species. Okay. So let's try to explore on the waterbirds that we can see. Unlike other techniques where people will generally try to introduce the species following families, I try to use a different approach. I try to use a more behavioral approach to separate them into 4 categories. The waterbirds that are on, specifically sitting on water or possibly going underwater. So there are quite a number of birds that seems to be so. And there are birds that will wade inside water, walk in water. There are also birds that are generally walking on the ground, rarely into the water. and also water birds that are generally flying around instead of being on the ground or in water. Okay, so these are the 4 major categories I will actually cover in this talk, and hopefully we'll get to explore quite a number of these interesting species and learn from this talk. The first one, sitting on water. Most people are very familiar with this concept. Even non-birders know, oh, birds sitting in water, ducks. So yes, ducks are very well known to sit on water. That's a concept that almost everyone know about, right? Okay, even if you don't know much about birds, you know ducks sit on water. Although some of them, they might not know ducks are bird duck. Other than ducks, there are also a lot of birds that looks like ducks that can sit on water. And some of them can also go underwater, because most of the time you're unlikely going to dive down to look underwater, so I don't open up a specific category. A lot of divers are likely to sit on water or float on water at some point as well. So they are pretty much in the same category. Other than feeding purposes that they are going to sit on water, some of them are actually resting on water as well. For example, gulls, terns, and shearwaters, they can actually rest on water. So don't be fooled by them. So first of all, of course, let's explore about ducks. Ducks is the most popular concept that we know of. And we have a few resident ducks. And 3 of the more widespread resident ducks are the lesser whistling duck. The lesser whistling duck is a common duck in Peninsular Malaysia, but quite rare in Borneo. You can notice that it has a rather long, slender neck, which is unlike a lot of other ducks, and generally a rather brownish duck. Okay, sometimes you will be attracted by their whistling calls in flight. Then you will notice these ducks over there. So other than the lesser whistling duck, one of the confusion species that you have to worry about is the wandering whistling duck. The wandering whistling duck is the common whistling duck in Borneo. It's coming into Borneo in a more recent time, but now it is actually quite widespread and common there. Therefore, you have to differentiate this in Borneo. The wandering whistling duck, one of the characteristics that you can see from rather far is it will have rather strong white linings on the flank compared to the lesser whistling duck, much more bolder and much more stronger. There are also some differences in their upper tail pattern if you see them in flight, but most of the time you possibly see them swimming in the water. So this is one of the better clues. They might also have a darker crown that you may notice. You have to pay attention to both of these ducks at wherever you are, because in Borneo, of course, generally you see wandering whistling duck, but you might sometimes see lesser whistling duck in rare numbers as well. While in Peninsular Malaysia, we have 2 records of wandering whistling duck in Perak. We don't know how it gets there, but it's also possible that it will be more in the future. So you can give them a little bit of attention next time you see whistling duck to see if you find a rare one at where you are. So the next one that is also a resident duck is the cotton pygmy goose. The cotton pygmy goose is a smallest duck in Peninsular Malaysia, and it's common. It's not really common. It's more regular in Peninsular Malaysia and widespread. In Borneo, it's quite rare. Okay, the males are very easily told apart because it is totally having a white face and neck, but the females is harder, and the females actually have whitish on the face as well, crossed by a black line. Okay, this can be easily confused with some other migratory wintering ducks. They could look something drab like that. However, you can pay attention to the bill. The bills of the cotton pygmy goose is rather small and short and thick. So it's very unlike other ducks. And of course, they are not really goose, okay? Although they have such a name, they're not really goose. They are primarily called a pygmy goose because their bill shape looks thicker than the average ducks. So they are being called a goose because of that. Other than the resident ducks, we have a lot of migratory ducks. And the commonest migrant ducks throughout is the gargany. The gargany can be told apart by looking at the facial pattern. So usually we'll see non-breeding plumage here. It's quite hard to see the diagnostic male plumage. Okay, so you get to see a gargany over here swimming beside a northern shoveler, male northern shoveler. So it's much smaller. But the key is to pay attention on the face. You will notice the face seems to have a dark line crossing the eye, and a paler line at the cheek, which is almost parallel to that line. This is a very distinctive face feature among ducks. So you can use this as a clue for you to identify. As you know, a lot of males, as they get into breeding plumage, they look very different. Like the male down here is molting into breeding plumage. It becomes darker and darker, showing the clearer white eye over there, the white eyebrow over there. To tell, most ducks are very rare in Malaysia in general, or at least uncommon in certain states, for example, in Sabah and Perak. So most of the time, you may have to try your best to tell whether you are looking at a rarer duck or not. So I try to compile the possible ducks that you are more likely going to meet in Malaysia, okay, particularly in areas with better freshwater wetlands. So I will pay a focus on their female or wintering plumage, especially female plumage, because the male plumage usually have quite distinctive colorations. Therefore, it's very helpful for you to ID them. The first one is the northern shoveler. The northern shoveler can be told apart from other drab brownish ducks by having a really large bill. It looks very, very large. This is why it's called shoveler, because it looks like a shovel kind of bill. So you can look for this large bill that is broader at the end of the bill. And the next one is a northern pintail. The northern pintail, I can't find a female plumage over here, but the male plumage here is helpful as well, because what we need to learn about is the shape of the head. You notice that the northern pintail is like the lesser whistling duck, has a long, slender neck, unlike other ducks that you generally see here. It has a long, slender neck. So even without the plumage, it's quite helpful. So how to tell apart from whistling ducks? The crown is much more higher and rounder than whistling ducks. For whistling ducks, the crown looks much more flatter. So even if you look at a browner female northern pintail, you'll notice that the head shape is rather distinctive as well. Of course, if you get to see a nice male like that, you definitely know, wow, this is a northern pintail. The colorations will be very different. One of the confusion that you have to worry about is not really a wild bird, but the mallets. The domesticated mallets can sometimes look brown, dark brown, with white patches on neck and breast. So quite a number of people will be, wow, pintail, pintail. But actually, if you look closely, the patterns are not the same. For northern pintail, recognize the pattern, the well-defined pattern with a slim little white line going up towards the head. So if you don't see this pattern and you don't see the gray upper parts, very likely you're looking at a normal kampong duck. Okay, so don't be too surprised when you see such a kind of color. Examine carefully. The next one would be a green-winged teal. The green-winged teal is a small migratory duck. You get to see that the face pattern looks like the northern shoveler, okay, but the bill is much more smaller and often seems to be much shorter neck. So you can see a dark line crossing the eye as well. So these give you a hint for the male plumage, because the male plumage, they actually have a face mask that almost cut through this, following this dark line as well. Okay. The green-winged teal is definitely the rarest among all the ducks that I'm sharing over here, with rather few records both on Peninsula side and Sabah as well. It's generally very rare. The next one would be a Eurasian region. Eurasian region don't quite show the stripes on the face like a lot of these shoveler and tails do. Usually more plain color even in wintering plumage. One of the things that you have to look for is a distinctive rounded, rather largish head. Okay, so recognize this shape, a rather rounded, largish head. So you could possibly be looking at a region. So this region is also not really that common, okay, but not to the states of very rare. So you can pay attention on this. One of the commonest establishing wintering ducks that we get now, previously is very rare, is the tufted duck. The tufted duck, you can try to look for their yellow eyes. So of course, the back one, possibly a younger bird, iris is not yellow yet. But for all adults, the yellow iris is important, both for females and males. You could also potentially see a paler flank region. okay, whitish in males and more brownish in females. In general, these ducks looks more blacker. They won't become too pale brown like other ducks. So they looks more blacker to dark brown. The tuft that is in the name of the tufted duck comes from a small little tuft on the head. But don't pay attention on that tuft. Most of the time in wintering months, you don't get to see the tuft. They don't really establish a very clear tuft before they fly back. So the tuft is not a very useful characteristic, but sometimes it can be seen in some birds, okay, if you can see that. Next, we come to the little grape. I've seen a lot of local birders calling the little grapes a duck, but they are not ducks, okay? Sitting on water doesn't mean that they are ducks. A lot of them are not really ducks. How to tell the difference is looking at the bill. The ducks have a rounded-ended bill, okay, except for like mergansers and so on, but mergansers are not found in Malaysia, so don't worry about that. So if you see a bill that is not round-ended and broadish, they are most likely not going to be ducks, okay? They can be pointed, they can be hook bill as well. So you can see a pointed bill over here, but when little grapes are swimming very far away, this could be very difficult to see. But they are usually swimming in open waters where there are some sunlight. Try to focus on looking at the small yellow patch on the base of the mandible, as well as the rufous wash on the neck. So these are one of the better characteristics that you can actually try to pay attention to see when you see very far duck-like birds that you are not sure whether are ducks or grapes. And of course, if you see them dive into water, the chances of it being a grape is much higher, okay? For a ducks, usually ducks that would dive in water is the tufted duck, a diving duck. The rest of the ducks generally can't dive in water or rarely do so, okay? Then another category of birds that are sometimes called ducks by locals are the cormorants. The cormorants actually looks very different from ducks if you see them, because they have very long tails, same to the darters. This tail helps them maneuver underwater because they are primary divers. You will also notice if you get close enough, their bills are hooked. Okay, it's very hard to tell from here, but the features will be very different. As you see the tail, you will know that these are not ducks, they are something else. To tell the difference between the darters with the cormorants, one of the best way is to look at the bill shape. The bill shape for darters are pointed, long and pointed, but cormorants have hook-ended bills. So this is a very different design, okay? Both of them can actually float on water as well once they have done some diving. They can float on water as well. However, you will notice that they generally don't float like ducks. Most of their body parts will be submerged in water. Sometimes almost the whole body part is submerged in water and you only see a head coming out. Both cormorants and darters behave like that, okay? So you can actually try to pay attention on this. Another duck-like bird that is common is the Eurasian moorhen. The moorhen is definitely not a duck. For mature adults, it's quite easily told apart because you can see the very bright red bill and shield from very far away. Then you know, oh, this is not a duck, definitely. Okay, so for younger birds could be harder. And if you see them walking out of water, you will notice that they are not ducks. They don't have the webbed foot, okay? Their foot is not webbed. It's with long toes. So they are not really ducks. And you will feel that, oh, they look very much like a water hen. Yes, they are more related to water hen, okay? So they look much like a water hen on the ground with longish legs. Ducks have generally shorter legs and usually web-footed, okay? So these are all the common or usual sitting duck or duck-like birds that you could possibly be seeing. Then there are quite a number of other birds that can sit on water that you possibly can look out, for example, like pelicans, coots, musk finfoot. Phalaropes can actually sit in water and navigate over there looking for food as well. So you can actually try your luck to look at this, including those birds that are only resting in water. However, excuse me, remember to look out for imposters. The birds that I'm showing you over here, none of them is a single bird that sits on water. Not a single one. Okay. Someone accidentally unmuted their mic. Hey, Chen. All right, great. Sorry. Okay, so next, let's look at these imposters. The first one is actually a cattle egret. Okay, that's actually a cattle egret. From far, it looks like a duck. Then the next one is not a swan, it's a little egret. I purposely don't want to show the bill. And the last one is a gray heron. They are not really swimming in water. I have also seen black crown night heron do that. One of the reasons is they possibly fell into water and they have to struggle to the ground. And another reason is they are actually just wading in the shallow waters and they wade too far away into the waters until they started to get submerged a little bit. But they are just walking in higher water levels. They are still wading. So these are not really ducks and not really duck-like birds. Okay, and they're not really swimmers. Talking about that, then we talk about wading birds, because birds that can walk into water areas, these are called wading. Okay, so in order to walk into water, they usually have to have rather long legs. And because they have rather long legs, they should have rather long neck and long bill as well, so that they can feed. Otherwise, imagine a long leg bird with short neck and short bill. Wow, it will be very challenging for them to find food. So generally, they come in a set of design. Their tails are usually shorter as well. This can prevent their feathers from getting wet, because getting wet is a bad thing. They could actually get hypothermia because it is too cold out there. So they generally have to try to keep themselves dry. Therefore, they usually just walk in water, and very rarely, like those herons do, walk until they got some of their body parts soaked into water. Okay. So common waders are the larger long-legged birds like the herons, and the common herons, I include the purple heron and gray heron. I guess these are quite common for a lot of you. You can recognize them by the specific patterns that you see, like a very dark, often appearing blackish from far is a purple heron, brown one is a juvenile, and a gray-looking one is a gray heron. The harder ones would be the egrets. Egrets are essentially white color herons. In the past, they thought it was in the same category. Ended up, it was just a species that develops generally white feathers are called egrets. Okay, they may not be that closely related to one another. For the egrets, one of the smallest egrets in Malaysia is the cattle egret. So the cattle egret is a small little egret, but they rarely wade into water. They usually walk outside of water areas and walk a lot in grass areas. Okay, I included it here because it gets confused with other egrets very easily as well. However, if you know what to look at, it's quite easy to tell apart because their bills seems to be rather short. Their legs also seems to be rather short. In overall situation, they felt like a very short egret on the ground. Okay. When they get into breeding plumage, things will become superbly clear and easy because this is the only egret in Malaysia that develops yellow plumage. Okay, if you see yellow plumage, a little bit of yellow, sometimes you get to see a little bit of yellow. Okay, a little bit of yellow, even in some non-breeding plumage starting to molt, you get to see tiny bit of yellow. So once you see this yellow part, you know this is a cattle egret. So this is one of the breeding stage. Bill is also getting red. It's quite beautiful. Sometimes you can even see this yellow tone from flight. So this is one of the easier egrets to tell apart from flight because their neck is shorter, so they don't have a strong bulge on the neck, and you often see a yellow tone during breeding months. So about March onward, you get to see a lot of these breeding colors. They are so-called cattle egrets because they are often feeding near to cattle. And in Malaysia, one of the most common cattle that they can feed along with are buffaloes. Okay, so you get to see egrets next to buffaloes, there are high chance that they could be cattle egrets. The next egret is the little egret. The little egret is taller than the cattle egret. One of the key is that the little egret has black bills all the time, a long black bill all the time. Okay, so if you see this long black bill, it's quite helpful. And the common subspecies has a different color on the feet or toes, sometimes just restricted on the toes. It's yellow usually, and when they are getting ready to breed, it will turn to orange and finally very reddish. Okay, so there is also a black toad subspecies in Malaysia, but that subspecies is a lot less uncommon. Then try to use their black bill and their facial feature to help you identify. In the breeding time, they are the only one that develop these long nuptial plums that are pretty much still in a single feather, a longish feather. So this is a good idea for you to actually tell apart in breeding time as well. One of the interesting plumage of the little egret is a dark moth that is actually discovered a few years ago. Okay, we know that dark moth exists outside of Malaysia for a long, long time, but we have never expected that it possibly would eventually migrate to Malaysia. So when it does, it could be easily confused with another bird from the Australasian zone. And this is the white-faced heron. You see, looks very similar, right? The white-faced heron was even thought to actually wander as far as Taiwan in the past. But however, in recent data, those records over here in Taiwan until Malaysia, including Sabah, all the claims of the white-faced heron are most likely the dark moth little egret. How to tell the difference? First of all, if you can look at the feet, you can see that the toes is yellowish to reddish in a little egret, but it's uniformly gray for the whole leg until the toes in the white-faced heron. Then the wings will show a lot of patchy white. This could be different according to different individuals. So it shows patchy white on wings of little egret, but if you get to see a flying white-faced heron, it has a fully uniformly gray wing. For the face, the white is more restricted, circling around the face area in a white-faced heron, but in a little egret dark moth, the white can extend further away and doesn't seem to be so well defined. You might also notice that there will be a purplish tone on the breast of the white-faced heron and some lighter gray streaks over it, which is very different from the more uniform gray that you see in a little egret. Okay, of course, we do not know if the white-faced heron would eventually really come over here as a vagrant. So if it does, pay attention to some of these characteristics. Okay, the next one would be the great egret. It's far bigger than the little egret. The big egret is often told to have a strong kink in the neck. However, I don't recommend you guys to use it because it's really hard to find this kink and it's really variable according to posture and so on. The more helpful clue is this gape line over here. Okay, it is said to extend further after the eye. Right, you have to get rather close to see this feature. From far away, you possibly can try to judge by seeing a very long neck on the bird. Feels so unnaturally long, then possibly you are looking at a great egret. Okay. If you get to see the legs as it doesn't walk that much in water, you realize that it seems to be rather tall compared to other egrets as well. Generally, the bill is yellow, but pay attention at breeding time, they will turn black. So this is molting. They have not fully turned black yet, but you can see part of the bills are already now black. Okay, I can't find a photo with a very nice black bill, totally black, but it can turn totally black during breeding time. However, they rarely breed in Malaysia with very few records. Okay, so generally you rarely get to see this black bill grade egret. Most of the time they have already left us before developing such plumage.
Every day I watch all these things, I finish this thing.
All right, so the next one that we have is an intermediate egret. The intermediate egret is known to be somewhere between the little and the great egret. So the intermediate egret has the size in between them. But without a little egret and a great egret standing next to it to tell you that it's somewhere between it, is really challenging to tell. One of the key that we tell you just now when we differentiate the great egret is look at the gape line. The gape line will not pass the eye, often just ending around at the middle of the eye, it already ends over there. This is one of the most confident feature that you can find. Okay, other features are harder and you need more time to get familiar with the overall shape, overall ratio of these egrets to tell. Often, the intermediate egret will have postures that show you more rounded crown as well compared to the great egret. The great egret will more likely be actually having a much flatter crown. Of course, this is hard because in certain postures and certain time, they don't seem to be so rounded. Okay. One of the non-breeding time, you might notice that the intermediate egret has a black tip. This is stated in some books. However, I won't recommend that this is a superbly useful characteristics because you know that the great egret can eventually mold into a black bill, so they can go through this stage. And also, as they feed on muddy areas, it's very easy for them to stain their bill tip and give you the wrong perception that it has a black bill. But in a very clean intermediate egret bill, it does have a black tip. Okay, very small little black tip. The kink is said to be not so strong, but I personally can't really see a great way to tell the difference between these and other egrets. At certain postures, you still get to see a rather good kink over there. Okay, although they don't always stretch out their neck like that. However, if you get familiar enough with great egrets, you will realize that this stretch of the neck is not long enough for a great egret. This will need a lot of years of experience to get familiar with the ratio. It will be very difficult to teach you, but you can try to get familiarized with it. You might notice that the legs seems to be shorter than the great egrets in general because it's adapting to walk more on grassy areas. In breeding plumage, they will also develop black bills, but breeding plumage is very rarely seen in Malaysia. Okay, I have only seen once, because most of the time before they develop this stage, they have already left Malaysia. So this photo by Dr. Amar is actually rather lucky because he managed to find a rare situation where they breed in Malaysia. Okay, so you get to see the full black breeding bill. You will notice that one of the interesting point is the rest of the other egrets seems to develop more fancy colors on their face during breeding. They retain to have just a bright yellow, one of the less interesting colors. Like great egret will have green. For little egrets, generally reddish. So they just have a yellow. But their eyes do turn red during breeding season, so it's quite interesting as well. Okay. In general, they can wade in water, but not so frequent. They more frequently walk on grass. Okay, therefore, behavior-wise, you can see if they are walking on grass, likelihood of them being a great egret or little egret could be less, especially if this grass area is further away from ponds or open water. Okay. So now we get to see all of them standing side by side, and we can compare them. You can see the little egret is the smallest one, followed by the intermediate egret somewhere in the middle, and the largest great egret. It's quite hard to get all three of them coming into the same frame. However, the postures over here, you feel that the intermediate egret looks big because the intermediate egret is sort of buffing a bit of its feather out right now, so it can appear bigger. Birds can easily try to compact their feather a bit and also puff it out a little bit. So their size judgment could be very difficult in the field. You can see over here, this is a little egret and an intermediate egret over here on the top right. So when they perch very close to one another, you will notice that the intermediate egret is not really that much bigger than a little egret. I have seen them flying side by side, generally just bigger a little bit by possibly 10 to 15% in terms of body mass. They are not really that much bigger. However, if you see a little egret near a great egret, the size comparison will be more conspicuous. It will be more obvious and clear that, wow, a small bird and a big bird. So other than these inland egrets, we have two egrets in the coastal area. To tell that, because other egrets like great egrets are common in coastal area as well. To tell that you're not looking at those egrets, you can look at their legs. The legs are generally yellowish to greenish yellowish in these coastal egrets. Okay, so if you get to see this kind of legs, most likely you are looking at that. But of course, young little egrets can have more yellow patches of greenish yellow in their lakes. Okay, so if you're inland and see such a lake, pay more attention, right? The first one is the Chinese egret. The Chinese egret is actually having is actually a migrant, while the Pacific Reef egret is actually a resident. Okay, one of the way to tell them apart is by their length of the tibia. So in Chinese egret, you can see that the tibia is generally longer, but in Pacific Reef egret, this is actually shorter and also thicker. Okay, so sometimes you don't get to see the whole part, but generally Pacific Reef egret has shorter legs and thicker legs, so they seems to be shorter a bit. One of the helpful characteristics is to check their bill shape. The bill shape is more slender and more dagger-like with a stronger down curve on the upper mandible than the lower mandible. But in the Pacific Reef egret, it is actually thicker and more symmetric. You feel that the curve on the lower mandible is also rather strong as well. So this seems to be a more symmetric shape. One very important key for Chinese egret is this dent before the eye. So the white color area that dent in before the eye is actually some helpful feature for you to tell apart a Chinese egret from other egrets as well. And for the reef egret, one good news is the white color reef egret that you see over there is relatively uncommon to rare in Malaysia. You generally see this one, a distinctive bluish gray bird. So in general, you are unlikely going to easily get confused because chances for you to see a white color Pacific Reef egret is actually less. But of course, for those friends like Alan and so on over in Singapore, they seem to have a lot more white color reef egrets. So they do need to pay a lot more attention than we do. Okay. However, do still pay attention to it. During their breeding plumage, you will get to see rather different features, like for example, the Chinese egret will start to develop yellow bills and blue lores and their fluffy little nuptial plums and so on. That tells the difference. So during breeding plumage, it will be a lot more easy. You can refer to your field guides and double confirm. That will be very much easier. So usually in the non-breeding plumage is the hard part. Okay. The next group that looks like herons is the storks. Okay, just now Wuti say, oh, possibly he only know like the Asian open-bill. So the stork-wise, only the Asian open-bill is a widespread stork in Peninsular Malaysia today. It hasn't been so before 2013. So 2013, they just suddenly rushed and so on. Of course, other than that, we do have to worry about other storks as well. For example, the larger storks that we have in the zoos. To tell the difference, pay attention on their legs. The leg length of those that we see in the zoo are actually having longer legs compared to the ones that we have right now. So we can, based on this situation, we will know that the shorter leg ones are the Asian open-bill that we are looking at. Those in the zoo are the painted storks. And we also have milky storks in the zoo as well. So I'm putting all these over here for comparison in case you might be seeing, going to some of these parts that has different storks. Generally in flight, you will notice that the storks will have their neck stretched out. If you see a flying egret or heron, they will have their neck brought in, okay? The storks cannot bring in their neck in flight. But of course, a heron can always stretch out their neck in flight sometimes. So with a stretched out neck, you can definitely, you can't be so sure. But if the neck is pulled back, it's more likely a heron. Only adjutants are known to be able to actually retract the neck among storks, okay? So most of the storks will always have their neck stretched out. They have a more raptor-like flight with more soaring. And one of the key to tell the Asian open-bills in flight from other these painted storks and milky stork is pay attention to the extension of the legs. It's a lot more shorter compared to those you see in painted stork or milky stork. Okay, so generally you are likely going to see Asian open-bills. Painted storks, more likely if you are staying in the Klang Valley area or Johor Bahru area, you will possibly see some painted storks. Milky storks, if you are in Taiping, Lake Gardens, for example, then possibly you can see some milky stork. But there are also a possibility to see milky stalk in JB and also Klang Valley as well, and smaller numbers. On perch, you can notice that their the patterns on their wing is very different. So you see large blackish area over there in Asian openbills, and you see a patterned black, white, and pink for painted stalk, and it looks just white in milky stalk with their black flight feathers generally hidden under it. Okay. The open bill is so called because at rest they cannot close their bill. You will always see a gap over there. They cannot close their bill. This is why they're called open bill. And at rest, you will also be able to tell that painted stalks and milky stalks are from a different genus, the genus Mycteria. They have bald face and the forecrown, the forehead. Okay, this is very different from the well-feathered face of an Asian open bill. If you see this long-legged stalk flying, pay attention on the pattern on the underparts. So the underwing and also breastband is black. Not black, it's dark in painted stalk. You can notice this from quite far away. This should be white in milky stalks. Okay, so you can use some of these as clue for you to rule out these different stalks. The next group that I want to include over here is primarily because of these IBs is actually something that I have seen a lot of people get confused with. So I have seen a number of people trying to label Hadada IBs as glossy IBs. The glossy IBs is definitely a rather rare IBs in Malaysia. So in general, I will not include it. However, because of this confusion and the spreading situation of Hadada IBs, I would like to include this as well. The left one is the Hadada IBs. The Hadada IBs can be told apart by having a white mustache, okay? A white mustache over here. And also pay attention to the difference with the glossy IBs in terms of the iris color. It is pale in Hadada IBs, but it is dark in the glossy IBs. Okay. Also pay attention on the legs. The Hadada IBs have very short and very thick legs compared to glossy IBs. So to be frank, Hadada IBs is not really a wading bird. They don't really wade in water. They walk on grass, unlike glossy IBs. So you can tell the difference. The glossy ibis is rather scarce, usually found in wetland areas, in paddy land and so on, but it's generally a rather uncommon to rare migrant in Sabah and also in Perak, with very few records outside of these areas, perhaps some more records in Penang and so on. So it's really, really hard to see that. Okay, of course, there are other situations like how thick the bills are and so on, but these are some of the key characteristics that you can see. Hadada ibis is not native to Malaysia. It's actually introduced, it's actually not really introduced. It escaped from the bird park and has been common around the Titiwangsa Lake Garden for quite some time. And now, recently, we have known that it has spread as far north as Taiping. Okay, so now a possibility to see them in a lot wide range area, and I've also seen more and more people sharing sightings in the Klang Valley as well. Okay, so the Hadada ibis could be something that you could be meeting around you, and remember, don't think that it might be a glossy ibis. So the next is stilts. Stilts have very long legs. Stilts have not been a huge problem until recently they decided to actually split the Australasian population from the main overpopulation. Then we do have a big issue because we don't really understand that well with the plumage variations of stilts in the past, and we have not cared to worry that much to differentiate the subspecies and so on. But now after the split, we realize a big issue. So for these stilts, we have a problem over here with the stilts because the Australasian form, also called the pied stilt or the white-headed stilt, don't really have a very nice characteristic, because you see the one on the left right now has a white head, right? This is a black-winged stilt. It's not a white-headed stilt. Okay. And one problem with this black-winged stilt is some of their variations look like this. How to tell the difference between this and this? All right. The pied stilt on the right is now recently found in, confirmed, not really found, it's more like confirmed in Borneo. So I think there are records in Sabah, possibly in Sarawak as well. And also quite recently, we are starting to see records in the southern part of Peninsula, and we expect it to further spread. One of the key for you to look at when you are in Peninsular Malaysia or in Borneo, looking at this kind of black nape kind of stilts, pay attention to their crown. The crown seems to always be a little bit of dirtish in the black wing stilt, even when they show such a black nape. Okay, so far that is my personal observation of many different photos and individuals. They always still seems to be dirty, but it is purely white in a pied stilt. Okay, because in the pied stilt is a breeding plumage, but in the black wing stilt, you usually get this stage for younger birds. Another thing is you can also get to see that the black patches at the nape is usually much more wider in the pied stilt than in the black wing stilt. Okay, and one of the better key that is being used to identify these water birds is actually their behavior, and especially calls. So let's listen to the black wing stilt. Okay, this is the black wing stilt call. For those who have went to black wing stilt colonies and so on, you should be very familiar with this call. So what you should do is look out for the unfamiliar call that is given by the pied stilt, which sounds like this. It is a lot more thicker and more like a small dog barking compared to the black wing stilt. Okay, so pay attention at that barking call, and that could be a very helpful clue. Okay, next we come into sandpipers. For sandpipers, we have some more shorter bill sandpipers, and there are few sandpipers that are commonly confused among with one another. So for these sandpipers, they tend to have shorter bills, and they look very similar from far, but we can tell the difference over here. The common sandpiper that is going to wade in water in freshwater habitat is the wood sandpiper. These are very numerous in paddyland and freshwater habitats. You get many of them in a group, you get a lot of them, okay? They are sometimes confused with the common sandpiper. The common sandpiper can be found along coastal areas, all over in inland areas, even in storm drains, okay? I've seen them on roof of my neighbor's house as well. So they are very widespread compared to the wood sandpiper. But for a lot of people, they seem to be very similar to one another. However, you pay attention, the wood sandpiper has much more longer legs than the common sandpiper. So the wood sandpiper is actually physically usually wading in water, but the common sandpiper is not. It walks on land. It walks on mud flats, rocky terrains, and generally don't really walk into water. I've not seen any walking into water because they have much shorter legs. Okay, so they can walk in drains. The common sandpiper is also much more solitary. They don't like to be in groups. In wintering habitats, they can be very territorial, and they can actually chase away another common sandpiper nearby. So usually you get to see one of them, and then one of them is quite a distance away if you're on a mud flat and so on. Inland, you possibly don't get such wide area, you'll possibly see one. While wood sandpipers can be in a group, so very different in terms of behavior. If you pay attention, their plumage looks different on the back, the upper parts. The wood sandpiper seems to have a lot of fine patterns over here, including pale patches and also dark patches. A lot of these mixtures of this pattern, a very rich pattern over here in a wood sandpiper. However, it looks a lot more plainer in the common sandpiper, just like a cold brown, gray brown over there, with some wavy patterns over there that might not be so obvious according to the time of year. So in a more worn plumage, it could look very plain. All right. One other key to look for is the tail. What happens to the tail? The common sandpiper is one of the well-known sandpiper of this size to bob their tail. Okay, so they will bob their tail up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down as they move along. So this could be a helpful clue for you as well. Okay. Then for both of these, if you pay attention on their facial feature, you will notice that their supercilium extend beyond the eye. Why am I actually bringing this out? Is because we have a much rarer sandpiper in the region, the green sandpiper. And one of the best way to tell apart from these two similar looking sandpiper is the lack of that supercilium beyond the eye. You get to see some streaky situation, pale streaky situation behind the eye, but they don't really form a supercilium. So this green sandpiper is, to untrained eyes, looks somehow like a common sandpiper in the size range and structure range of a wood sandpiper. So it can be confused with both of these species for some of you. Okay, but key is look for this lack of this supercilium behind the eye. And also, if you pay attention on the upper part patterns, you will notice that upper part patterns look pretty much like the common sandpipers, but it is actually having pale spots rather than wavy patterns. Okay, it has pale spots on it rather than wavy patterns. Unlike the name suggests, don't expect to see a very green color bird. Okay, the green comes from a rather olive green gloss that you can see on the feathers when you are very, very close to it. For the average birders, you'll never see this unless you have super powerful cameras that get a very close shot. You might be able to experience that. Otherwise, don't rely on that green. Okay. Next, we go to the coast and look at some much taller sandpipers with longer bills. And these sandpipers are the godwits and dowitchers. The godwits and dowitchers are really tall and large looking sandpipers and among the larger ones, okay? The only contenders are like the curlews, but we'll cover curlews later on. So godwits and dowitchers have very tall looking structures. So this one over here is a black-tailed godwit, and this one is a bar-tailed godwit. One of the key to tell that these are godwit is that you can see a reddish base to their bill. Okay, then you can tell, oh, these are godwits. And to tell the bar-tailed godwits from the black-tailed godwits, one of the best feature is the bill. It is straight in the black-tailed godwit, but it's slightly up-curved in the bar-tailed godwit. If they're not flying, the black on the tail and the bar on the tail is not really something that you can easily see. So that's not really a strongly reliable characteristics when we are looking at a flock of feeding godwit that doesn't fly. So most of the time, pay more attention on their bill. Okay, their plumage can actually vary from a non-breeding plumage that you see in the black-tailed godwit now to more reddish plumage in the bar-tailed godwit. But this kind of plumage is very general. Even for dowitcher, they develop very similar reddish plumage as well. So they might not help you too much in identification. So the last one is the Asian dowitcher. It's not a godwit, but because the size, the height, and also the long bill is somehow similar to godwits, they could be confused with godwits. One of the key for you to actually pay attention to is their thicker looking bills that are quite straight and thicker and don't feel reddish. They feel rather blackish throughout the bill. So you can pay attention to this feature the next time when you see this. Okay. So all three are more coastal birds. You generally see them along the coastline, especially mud-flat areas. The bar-tailed godwit, however, is also known to occur inland during passage months, but I've not heard of records of godwits and dowitchers getting into inland habitats eventually. But the black-tailed godwit, possible. Black-tailed godwit is also commoner than the bar-tailed godwit and the dowitcher. Okay. Next, we look at smaller coastal sandpipers, and one of the commonest and most numerous is the common red shank. Common red shank, the red shank means the legs. So the legs are supposed to be red. And one of the key is, of course, look for this reddish tone on the legs as well as the base of the bill. However, bear in mind, these parts can always be stained by mud, so they don't appear so red. So don't draw your conclusion too quickly if you can't see red. Okay. One of the helpful keys is that in flight, you can actually see a very obvious white trailing edge on the wing that makes them very easily identifiable in flight. They are very numerous in coastal areas and possibly one of the most numerous sandpiper that you will meet in coastal areas most of the time. Okay, so they are common in these mudflat areas. And also in passage months, you can see them getting inland as well. So in passage months, possibility of seeing them inland is there. You might need to pay attention to a rarer spotted red shank. That's a lot more rarer in Malaysia. And also they appear more grayish, and they have a black breeding plumage, which is very distinctive. Possibility of. Okay, after the red shank, we can go to green shanks. Green shanks have more greenish or leaf legs that makes them green shank. One of the way that you can tell that you're looking at green shank is the bill. The bill is a thick, slightly up-curved bill. Okay, not too many sandpipers in Malaysia have up-curved bill, so this could be very helpful clue for you. However, this up-curve may not be so obvious sometimes at different angles. Okay, so only at certain times you can feel that up-curve situation. There are two types of green shank in Malaysia, including the common green shank and the Norman green shank. The Norman green shank is also called a spotted green shank because of the breeding plumage. I have not seen anyone sharing any breeding plumage in Malaysia, so we presume that likelihood to see breeding plumage in Malaysia is super low. One of the key difference that is used to differentiate these green shanks, most useful feature is their tibia length. The tarsus length is hardly seeable because most of the time, Norman green shank is walking in water. Okay, so the tibia is much longer in common green shank compared to Norman green shank. So if you get to see them walking side by side, you get to see Norman green shank is a shorty guy. Okay, in flight, it might be helpful because Norman green shank seems to show very short tail beyond the very short toes beyond the tail, but you will notice that the common green shank has a much longer situation passing through the tail. Okay, you can notice that the legs are really longer in flight. At perch, other clues to look for is the plumage. The common green shank, if you get closer look, you will feel that their upper parts look more patterned with a lot of small lines and spots and so on. It looks a lot more patterned, okay? However, in Norman green shank, it looks a lot more plainer, okay? Without that much of these small little wavy patterns over there. This could be a clue, right? Other than that, another identification feature that they tell you is the Norman green shank will be more likely to show a bicolored bill. Okay, use this with care because you can see some roughly bicolored bill in common green shank as well, and due to some age and situation, this might not be really obvious in Norman green shank as well. But if you see this could be helpful as a supportive feature. You get to see that the base will be more yellowish and the tip will be more blackish. This is the bicolor bill that they mentioned. Another bird that I include here, which is not a green shank, is the marsh sandpiper. The overall structure can allow you, and the plumage can allow you to be confusing it with green shanks, but it is very different from green shanks for having a very slender thin bill. Okay, so look for this very slender thin bill. It is also smaller than green shanks, okay, if you get to see them side by side. For the green shanks, take note that Norman green shank is not recorded inland. It is a coastal species, but common green shank is more widespread. It can be found in the coast and it can also be found inland as well, okay? So you can pay more attention on that. Other sandpipers that are rather distinctive that I don't really give them very special discussion is the ruff. The ruff looks very distinctive, a largish, bulkish sandpiper with a rather small head and a medium length bill. So you can often see this in some of the freshwater habitat, especially in Malinawa wetlands. This is rather regular, could be rarer elsewhere. One interesting thing about ruff is you can see that the left-hand side bird and right-hand side bird, they have very similar shape and so on, but the right-hand side bird looks significantly smaller, right? The largest females are shorter than the smallest male. So they have a very clear distinction between male and female sizes. Therefore, this is most likely a male and a female over here. Okay, so sometimes you see a flock of such bird that seems to be flocking together, sharing very similar features. However, some of them significantly look smaller. Maybe you are actually looking at ruffs. Okay, and the other one is a Kalil sandpiper. It's a sandpiper with a longish bill that curves down. Right? Possibility to confuse this with broadbill sandpiper is there. I will cover broadbill sandpiper later on. So look out for other possible wading birds, especially the spoonbills. Spoonbills are superbly poorly studied in Malaysia with very few records, and we only have one confirmed record with possibility of identifying it to species. So pay attention to these birds. Then you will realize that I break this category out in a different category for walking on the ground. Actually, you get to see that they have a lot of overlaps with those that wade and in water, and they are actually quite similar as well. So just now, those species that are likely to be confused, I already tried to show you on this first section, and I tell you they are more like ground walker. Why I put this as a separate situation is because those that walk on ground are often some different species, and they usually have shorter legs because they don't really need to walk into water. So a lot of time, their legs tends to be shorter than a lot of the wading water birds. Okay. However, although short, they are still longer than the average birds because they still don't want to be stained by mud. Okay, most of the time. The bill shape can be of variable length depending on the food type. If they pick food from the surface, could be shorter. If they want to probe into the ground to get food, could be longer. So some of them are on the ground and want to dip into water to get food, could be longer as well. So they have quite a number of variety of bills, and it's not really directly related to their choice of walking on ground. One of the most confusing category among these kind of ground walking birds are the pond herons. Pond herons is a challenge in identification, and quite a number of people got so headache with them because they are indeed a big headache. So pond herons can be told apart by having white color wings and white color belly. This can sometimes be seen if you pay great attention. But in certain birds where they have a lot more feathers dropping from the back and covering their wing, this could be very hard to find, but you can still try your best to look for the white on the belly and the wing. When they fly, this will be obvious. Their white wing will be shown. So for these pond herons, why we say it's a very big challenge, because first, under a non-breeding situation like that, such a brown little bird, some people might confuse them with night herons, straighted herons, and so on, or even beetons. Okay. However, if you get to see the white color wing and white color belly, you will definitely know this is a pond heron. We will definitely know it is a pond heron, but if you want to definitely know what species it is going to be challenging. They generally develop breeding plumage from around March onwards. Okay, so before that, when they first arrive in October, there's still possibility to see some very rare situations of breeding plumage. But later on, then chances for you to see breeding plumage is very rare. And why is this a problem? Because so far, we have no information on how to safely differentiate a non-breeding plumage of a pond heron to species level. That means during such non-breeding plumage, it is impossible to tell the species with the current knowledge. Okay, no one has an idea how to safely tell them apart. Good thing is when they develop breeding plumage, they will be very distinctive and very different. So you can see the differences over here. The Chinese pond heron can be told with the strong chestnut head and neck, and breeding plumage shows a dark black back. You can also notice that they will develop nuptial plumps, which is also chestnut, and the wings will be actually white when they are actually flying. Okay, this is the commonest pond heron. So when you start to see chestnut developing in any part of the non-breeding plumage, you start to see deep chestnut even a little bit, you can safely tell this is a Chinese pond heron. The next one is a Jawan pond heron. So the Jawan pond heron on the left-hand side over here, can you tell which one is the Jawan pond heron? This is obviously a Chinese pond heron. And these two looks like non-breeding plumage, right? But actually, this middle bird is a Jawan pond heron. Why do I know it? Because Jawan pond heron do also have the black back. This bird has already started to develop some black on the back. And you'll notice that there are a lot less white plumage on the neck already. Under such situation, losing so much of white, but you don't see chestnut tone, then you definitely know this is most likely going to be one of the pale-headed pond herons. However, you see that some darker brown is establishing here at the breast. So later we see this one should be taken around like 1 week later, shows more and more development towards a proper Jawan pond heron. So we finally confirm that this is indeed a Jawan pond heron in development. Jawan pond heron has darker parts in the breast and paler head. The pale head can have very variable tones from rather orangey rufous to rather goldenish yellow to almost white in a pale mauve that you see up here. You will notice that their nuptial plums is whitish or goldenish sometimes, okay? Usually whitish. So this is compared to the Chinese pond heron, is very different. Chinese pond heron is always chestnut, okay? So you can tell, you can use this as some of the features to tell apart the Jawan pond heron. Jawan pond heron also seems to have higher tendency to frequent coastal mud flats than other pond herons. The next one is the Indian pond heron, which is one of the most confusing pond heron. I remember when the first Indian pond heron is found in Ipoh, it causes a lot of controversy because if you look at the field guides and you look at the books, they tend to tell you, oh, Indian pond heron is very easy to tell apart, look for the maroon back. But I have been there in the field and I have about them in my backyard for around 4 to 5 seasons, and always the experience is the same. The maroon back is not as easy for you to capture in photo and not even easy for you to see in real life. Because the maroon back, if you don't get exact sunlight pointing at it, it doesn't appear to be so bright maroon at all. You can see quite a number of photos that I show you here. None of them are showing a strong maroon color. However, you can still notice maroon tones, especially towards the upper back. The maroon tones often still show, and if you pay attention to it a lot, you can still see the maroon thing behind the dark colors. If they walk in sun and the sunlight is direct shining on it, you would clearly see that that's a maroon. Okay, my experience with Indian pond heron is always as such. When they are not under the sun, they look a lot more darker, and I need to use scope to carefully check whether there's a maroon thing over there. A better key idea is to use their head to breast color, because their breast color, okay, seems to be same like their head color. Is also pale. It doesn't darken. If it darkens, it is possibly a Chinese pond heron or Jawan pond heron. If it doesn't darken, even when it is already starting to develop breeding plumage, as I tell you, less whitish and is still not dark, then this is very likely already confirmed to be an Indian pond heron. Okay, so the head color is actually a milky brownish gray, right? So you can actually try to look at this. So the key to differentiate this from Jawan pond heron, try to use more of the comparison with the head and the breast tone rather than the back tone. Only under good sunlight, you can see the back tone very well. Like the Jawan pond heron, it also have pale whitish nuptial plums. Okay. Next would be bitterns. Right, bitterns is actually shy birds that are hiding in the grass, quite hard to see them most of the time. The smaller lesser bitterns sometimes can actually walk up higher in the reeds and become more exposed. One of the key to tell apart bitterns is by looking at the eye. For the yellow bittern, you'll notice the eye has a full yellow circle. This is different compared to a cinnamon bittern, which is also shared with a monstrance bittern. They have a black part at the behind the pupil. So the iris forms a yellow C. Okay, this is very different. You may also notice that the yellow bittern has a grayish cap, contrasting grayish cap, and the bill is actually much more slender compared to the thicker bill in cinnamon bittern. The overall plumage is much more paler compared to the overall darkish plumage of the cinnamon bittern. The Shranks bittern could be confusing, but the males could be told apart by having much more paler wing coverts compared to the back. In flight, you can see their gray flight feathers, and you might see a contrasting gray cap as well. For females, they look like female cinnamon bitterns, but their spots are whitish instead of buffish. Okay, it's much harder to tell apart. So Shranks bittern are rarer, but you can actually pay attention to see if you can find them. The next category will be this black beaten. The black beaten is a large beaten that's unlikely going to be confused with other beaten because of their plumage. The black beaten has this yellow patch on the neck, which is quite distinctive. And you can see that the one on the right is blacker, is the male, and the one on the left is browner, should be the female. Why I'm putting it together with the straighted heron over here is the juvenile straighted heron seems to be easily confused with the black beaten. I have seen a number of birders, including Australian birders, that has labeled a straighted heron as a black beaten. The straighted heron is also called the little heron. It's a small little heron. And you can see that the juvenile down here seems to be resembling a bit of the black beaten. However, if you pay attention to their facial pattern, it's very different. You will see a clear yellowish face skin on the straighted heron, but this is absent in the black beaten. Okay, and the iris color is also brighter yellowish. The back color will be very different. It's more uniform in black beatens, but is highly patterned in a juvenile straighted heron. Their behavior could be helpful as well. Juvenile, the straighted heron could be more exposed, in a more exposed area than the beatens. Beatens are very shy. If you see an adult, it's more easy to tell apart because their pattern is very distinctive, especially with a contrasting black cap. The next would be a black crowned night heron. The black crowned night heron has reddish eyes and very distinctive adult plumage. What is hard to identify is usually the juvenile plumage. The juvenile plumage has yellowish and could establish to orangey and reddish eyes as they become the adults. Okay. They can be confused with pond herons, beatens, straighted herons, and so on, but they have shorter, thicker bill, and also pay attention to their back pattern. It's actually white spots. Okay, there are actually a lot of white spots over there. One of the confusion is with the reverse night heron. Reverse night heron is found in Sabah, where these species may overlap. The reverse night heron looks like the black crowned night heron, except that it looks more rufous. So it doesn't have a stronger dark back. That part looks uniformly rufous, just like the wing, and they have a rufous wash all over the bird, even in the under parts. Their juveniles looks very similar to the juveniles of black crowned night heron, but it's said to be brighter brown, and they will become redder and redder as it becomes the adult. Okay, so if you are in Sabah, pay more attention to these juvenile night herons over there. Another rarer night heron I included over here because I've seen people misidentifying this, and it is possibly not as rare as we thought. So I've seen people misidentifying it as a other night herons and also as beatens. So for the Malay night heron, one of the key for you to look for is their back pattern is with strong, dense patterns over there. Very strong, dense barring and spottish patterns over there. This is very different from other herons. Even in the adult plumage, if you pay attention, they still have some very faint, wavy patterns over there. The adults can be told apart by having a black contrasting crown. So if you are in Sabah, pay attention to possibility of seeing a Japanese night heron that looks like this, look like the adult Malayan night heron, but it doesn't have this black crown. They don't have a distinctive juvenile plumage that looks like the Malayan night herons juvenile as well. They look more like the adults. So you can pay attention when you're in Sabah, you might be able to see such a rare night heron. Next category, we come to craigs. Of the craigs, this rufous looking craigs is the most confusing because they seem to look very similar to one another. The first one is the red leg craig. Of course, the leg is red over here, but the more important thing that for us to look at is the face. The face looks rather strongly rufous and reddish, so you feel that it looks very red. Comparing to the ruddy breast craig, they do actually have reddish pinkish leg as well. So the red leg craig is not really that nicely named. For the ruddy breasted craig, they have much darker tone of rufous, very deep purplish reddish. Okay, so they are quite different. And also pay attention to their patterns. It's barred, strongly barred in a red leg craig, including their upper wing. They have a lot of barrings, but they don't really have this in the ruddy breasted craig. The bill is also smaller in the red leg craig compared to the thicker, larger bill of a ruddy breasted craig. For the red leg crake, a confusion species is the slitty leg crake. But slitty leg crake can be told apart from these other species by having gray legs. So if you see gray legs and somehow like that, this is like slitty leg crake. Their barracks on the wing is also less, okay, not so much. Another another similar species to ruddy-breasted crake, which is not common, is the band-bellied crake. Band-bellied crake has slightly brighter rufous than the ruddy-breasted crake in general, and it has much clearer bands on belly to band. Actually, ruddy-breasted crake has some faint bands over here in the lower belly and back, but they are usually rarely seen. They will be more obviously seen in the band-bellied crake. Other than those crakes, the swamp hen is also causing a problem. The black-backed swamp hen is found in Borneo and is now getting to the southern part of Peninsular Malaysia and spreading as well. So of course, black-backed swamp hen, you would think that the back is black, so this would be a good way to tell. However, the gray-headed swamp hen can actually show black backs as well. The gray-headed swamp hen is the common widespread form in Peninsular Malaysia and is not found in Sabah or Sarawak. It's not found in Borneo. Okay. However, this blackback is not really useful as well. Sometimes it could be very pale and more bluish as well in certain individuals or certain angles. So don't pay too much attention over there on the back. Pay more attention to the head. It's very dark blackish for a black-backed swamp hen. However, it's pale to at least blue in gray-headed swamp hens. Okay. There are a few more distinctive looking and rather widespread species of rails, including a white-browed crake, the white-breasted water hen, very common even in urban areas. The watercock is distinctive enough even in female or non-breeding plumage. There are barely anything that can be confused with this. Slaty-breasted rail is also rather distinctive, but with discoloration. And you can see on the top right, you have buff-banded rail. This is a new invading species in Borneo, and it's getting common over there as well. However, it is not in Peninsular Malaysia yet so far. Okay, finally, we go to the waders. Waders are the confusing group, but differentiating with those that generally walking in water, the larger waders that usually walk on the mud are curlews. Okay, curlews often can wade into water, but they seem to spend quite a lot of time on the mud. Curlews have longer bills than most of these mud waders. So we get to see the commonest over here is a rimbrel, and the larger one over here is a Eurasian curlew. Rimbrels has far shorter bills than the Eurasian curlew. Eurasian curlew has really very long bills, and even their legs are same. So the legs of Eurasian curlew are far longer as well. However, rimbrels are far more numerous than the curlews. Curlews possibly you'll see a few of them, rarely a huge flock. The little curlew is a rare migrant that is recorded in Peninsular Malaysia that can be confused with rimbrel, but they have even shorter bills. And so far, I don't think anyone has recorded little curlews in mudflats. Little curlews are open country birds. They are found in paddy land or grassland. Okay. While for the Eurasian curlew, you may have to pay attention to the underpart colors, which is generally whitish, especially the vent is white color. And also in flight, you'll see the underwing is also whitish. This can be confused with the Far Eastern curlew. Far Eastern curlew looks like Eurasian curlew, slightly even larger, but they have pale brownish underparts, including the vent. And their underwings have dark patterns. So you can tell the difference when they are in flight and pay attention on their underparts. A distinctive sandpiper that you see in the coastal areas on the mudflat is the Terek sandpiper, distinctive with a orange upcurved bill. As we tell you, not much waders have an upcurved bill. Of course, this upcurved bill also follow a distinctive orangey short legs. Okay, they like to eat crabs, so you often see them catching crabs. Then we have the broad-bill sandpiper, as I tell you, could be confused with the curlew sandpiper we mentioned earlier, but broad-bill sandpipers doesn't seem to walk into water that often. They have shorter legs. One of the better key distinctive feature is their double eyebrow over here, what we call double eyebrow. Technically, they have an extra pale stripe on the crown that is above the supercilium. So from the angle, you feel that it has two pale supercilium, two pale eyebrows. So we call it the double eyebrow. This is a very special characteristic, and you can look for this characteristic to tell the difference. And now we come to the really headache one, stints. We have 4 species of stints. Stints are the small little birds that are walking near water. First of all, pay attention to their legs. If they are of yellowish color, then they will be much more easier to be identified. This includes the Taming stins and the long-toed stint. The Taming stint is much more grayish overall in their wintering plumage. It's very grayish, and including the breast area seems to be pretty grayish as well. Their back is also pretty pale grayish. Overall, they look like a pale grayish bird. While the long-toed stint have more well-defined facial pattern that shows a supercilium and a lot of streaky patterns, and until those streaks are often quite streaky on the breast as well. The upper part patterns, they can be confused with the wood sandpiper sometimes, but they are smaller than the wood sandpiper. And if you pay attention, the upper part patterns that are strongly marked over there are different compared to the wood sandpipers. The wood sandpipers, remember just now, a lot of fine patterns of bright and dark spots. But the long-tailed stints is basically just having dark center part for their feathers, a broad dark center parts for their feathers. So this is a very different pattern. You can also notice that their bill is shorter. So be careful next time when you see this small-looking wood sandpiper-like kind of bird. They are possibly long-toed stints. Long-toed stints have long toes, but don't rely on it that much. They don't show you the toes that much. They don't always just pick up and show you, my toes. Okay, not so much. Both the Taming stint and the long-toed stint are basically found in freshwater habitats. Long-toed stint is very common and numerous. Taming stint a lot less common, rather rare. Okay. The other 2 stints is the troublesome stint, but you might actually notice that their facial pattern is quite different. They seem to have more whitish throat to breast area. Okay, this is a clear difference that you can see. So both of them also have black legs if you pay attention. These are the red-necked stint and the little stint. In their breeding plumage, of course, it's much more easier to tell apart, but in the non-breeding plumage, it's really, really challenging, and it's definitely very difficult. The red-necked stint has shorter legs compared to the little stints. However, if they are not standing side by side, this can be very challenging to judge because they might be partially dipping into mud and so on. So it's very, very challenging to judge. Okay. However, if you see mixed flock of them, you will find that the little stints stand up taller. One of the better features for you to look at is the bill. The bill is shorter in the red-necked stint and longer in little stints. Often, the end of the little stint will be downwards a little bit and more slender looking. The head of the red-necked stint is bigger when compared to the body, and the little stint shows a smaller head when compared to the body. The red-necked stint is primarily numerous in coastal areas. Okay, in coastal mudflats, very numerous, a large flock of them. In inland areas, they are only found in passage months. While little stints is actually found both in coastal areas and also inland areas, often singly or in small groups. So it could be very challenging. So you have to actually try your best to tell the difference. But in normal wintering months, if you see them in inland areas, they are more likely little stints. Okay. While in coastal areas, you have to pay a lot more attention to find out these lesser little stints. Okay, little stints are not smaller than red-necked stint. Their size are about the same, and because they are taller, so they often appear bigger than the red-necked stints. Okay. The next category of confusing situation are snipes. For the snipes, it's very hard to identify snipes in general. But the easiest is the common snipe. And the other one, we can't actually identify them usually, which is the pintail and the swing-tailed snipe. So we put them in the same category. Common snipe is easy because the white trailing edge over here very obvious compared to the pintail swinghole snipe without the white trailing edge. And also the underwing pattern is different, right? Whitish with broad dark blackish compared to finely barred with the pintail and swinghole snipe. One better way to check their ID when they are on perch, when you can't see this wing, is to look at their wing coverts. You will notice that the common snipe has these small pale ends to their wing coverts, which are generally rather dark brown. So you will notice that it seems to have some whole spots, pale spots forming bars on the dark wing. Also, you can see these paler edge of these wing cover feathers over here usually are only on one side. The outer edge is much more obvious. This is different compared to a pintail or swinghole snipe. Pintail swinghole snipe seems to have a more barry kind of a wing coverts, which is generally buffish with some dark bars. Okay, so they don't really show that much of a specific bar. In fact, the dark bars will become more obvious and you feel that they are paler with dark bars. Their pale edges appears to be on both sides, so appears to be a V shape, okay, more obviously. When they actually show you the tail, it is helpful. The outer tail looks the same length in a common snipe, okay? But of course, common snipe, when they fly, is already helpful, so the tail is not so helpful. But to tell the difference between pintail snipe and swinghole snipe, the tail is definitely very crucial. The rest of the features are all not useful. The pintails over here can be seen in terms of the very thin, pin-like tails. This is thicker in the swinghole snipe, but at least the outer tail feather are still thinner, narrower than the central tail feather. Okay, you need a lot of patience to wait for one that's preening and show you the tail. So you need a lot of luck. I myself have not seen that. One of the not snipe that can be confused is the greater pintail snipe. They are not true snipes, but they can be confused with snipes. Their bills are actually curvy, shorter and curvy, and the males that might be confused, you can see they have a distinctive face pattern and also distinctive upper wing pattern that's very different from the migratory snipes. Females are very distinctive and very colorful. Okay. The other headache is the sand plovers. Sand plovers will come with without this hind neck over here, they look pretty sandy brown. We have the lesser sand plover that's smaller and the greater sand plover that's larger. They're really difficult to tell apart, but in general, they tell you that lesser sand plovers have darker grayish legs and greater sand plover has paler yellowish legs. They are possibly yellowish olive legs in lesser sand plover and also grayer legs in greater sand plover. But most of the time, lesser sand plover always have darker legs and then greater. Their bill is said to be shorter in the lesser sand plover and longer in the greater sand plover, but this is superbly difficult to judge. The eyes is also said to be larger in greater sand plover. Let's have a closer look of the two bills of the lesser and the greater sand plover. One of the more helpful feature is actually try to look at this point where the bulge starts to happen. It is much more further at the front of the lesser sand plover and is pretty much in the middle for a greater sand plover. However, you will need to have a scope to see this picture. Otherwise, what other clues is try to look at the overall look. It looks more cuter in the lesser sand plover, but because of the larger eye, it looks a little bit more serious in the greater sand plover. Their food differences also help you. The greater sand plover likes to eat crabs, so they will try to look for crabs and run a distance to catch it. While lesser sand plovers are looking for marine worms, so they might be more leisurely walking around listening for worms and then start to pick up them from the ground. Okay, these might be some helpful features. Otherwise, we might need another talk to discuss how to differentiate the lesser sand plovers and greater sand plover. Okay. All right. The other group of plovers that you can see on the areas that's different from the sand plovers is look for the white neck over here. Then they will be different. The Kentish plover is the commonest. Their backs are often quite palish. And there's a white-faced plover that's now still often considered a subspecies of Kentish plover. Key difference is you see their lores are white, okay, compared to Kentish plover. Their back is also like Kentish plover, rather pale. So compared to the resident Malaysian plovers, the resident Malaysian plovers have a more variegated back that is not so palish and have more patterns. The male plumage and the breeding plumage of Kentish plover can be similar, but you can see that the black spot behind the eye is actually separated, not connecting to the eye. This can also be compared for female Malaysian plover with a non-breeding Kentish plover. Malaysian plover don't have a non-breeding plumage, so they don't have such a situation. The Kentish plover is generally found in coastal mudflats, sandy beaches, and also in passage ponds they can be found inland as well. While Malaysian plover is a resident that is more favoring sandy beaches than other habitats. Then we have ring plovers. Ring plovers can be found inland as well, and also in coastal areas. Ring plovers are differentiated from the Kentish plovers and so on. They also have the white on the collar, but they have usually orangey legs. The little ring plover is the common ring plover. In breeding plumage, the yellow eye ring is very obvious. It's a lot less obvious when you are dealing with non-breeding plumage. However, if you are looking at the common ring plover, that is totally absent. You can't see it. Okay. The little ring plover non-breeding plumage shows brownish patterns at where the breeding adult shows black, but in common ring plovers, these often still remain to be rather blackish. Okay, and you still see the band over here is also brownish. Common ring plover has thicker breast band and also a more squarish head. The forehead will be more protruded outward, squarish. A very useful feature is when they fly, you can see a clear white wing bar in the common ring plover, which is absent in little ring plover. But common ring plover is really rare in Malaysia, with very few records. The long-billed plover is also very rare. It has longer, slender bill, looks like a little ring plover, and has thinner breast band. Then for the larger plovers, you have the Pacific golden plover, which has goldenish, actually yellowish patterns on the back. You feel a yellowish wash compared to a black-bellied plover. Black-bellied plover is also called the gray plover because they don't have the yellowish. They look more grayer and not so darkish back. One helpful clue to recognize black-bellied plover is the black under wing base, which we often call it the black armpit. So in flight, this is very obvious. This is not seen in the Pacific golden plover. The black-bellied plover is strictly coastal, while Pacific golden plover can be found inland as well, and it's also smaller. Okay, both of them in their breeding plumage is very obvious. They both have black underparts, so the black-bellied plover is not a really nice name. And the upper wing, the upper parts is more goldenish in one and grayish in another. There are other large lap wings, which is quite distinctive as well. From the features, you can tell the red-watered lapwing, gray-headed lapwing, so not really hard to identify. And you can look out for many other these mud-walking birds, primarily waders, all around the place, including dunlins, sharp-tailed sandpiper, spoon-billed sandpiper, little curlews, and so on. The final group is the area water birds that flies. Because they are mainly flying, so they usually have longer wings so that they can sustain their flight more. These, of course, include the terns. The whiskered terns is a common tern on the coastline, perhaps one of the easier tern for you to see in coastlines than other terns. It's also found inland, but I don't find that it's so numerous inland. They have a more symmetric bill that has thicker symmetric bill compared to the very similar white-winged tern. And it also have these blackish areas in the non-breeding plumage, blackish areas behind the eye. Okay. In flight, you can see it has a shorter tail that only form a short fork, very shallow fork. Compared to most other terns who have long forks, these inland terns actually have shorter, shallow fork tails. The breeding plumage is very distinctive with a white mustache over there and a blackish to grayish underpart. They are most easily confused with the white-winged tern that is also common, widespread in coastal and inland areas, especially inland areas, very numerous. The white-winged terns can be told apart in non-breeding plumage by the ear mask that they are wearing over here. The earphone that they are wearing over here. Okay, this is a very characteristic feature that white-winged terns show. Okay. their bills is not so thickish and not so symmetric compared to the whiskered tern. In flight, they show very similar tail like the whiskered tern. Compared to other coastal terns, they technically has a shorter, very shallow fork on the tail, looks rather squarish. Okay? Breeding plumage is very distinctive because they become very black in color, except for the wings. Okay, this is why they are called white-winged tern, because their paler wings stand out like the white situation when they are breeding. However, their wings are not pure white. They have stronger white on their shoulder part on the leading edge. So when they perch and that leading edge contrasts greatly with the black, you feel that, wow, the wing looks white, but the white is only restricted on the shoulder leading edge. Okay, compared to really white-winged birds like the black-necked terns, they don't really actually have a white wing. Okay. However, bear in mind, take note on the whiskered tern, some of them can show rather more extended black under at the ear area, but this extension is not as much as those extension you see in the white-winged tern. They barely go very far beyond the eye, far below beyond the eye. So please pay attention on this as well. So try not to be confused. Wow, something going down must be a white-winged tern. Might not be. The smallest tern inland is the little tern. The little tern has a small little bill, shorter bill, slender bill compared to the rest. And it also has some blackish marks over here. The breeding plumage is much more easy to tell because they only have a white front part, forehead, and then they have a yellow slender bill with a black tip. They also establish longer fork tail during breeding plumage. Okay, so they can be told by their size. Sometimes they're really small, and they are found throughout in coastal areas and inland as well. In coastal areas, other conspicuous terns are the crested terns that has crests. Okay. The common species include the lesser crested tern and greater crested tern.